Welcome to the Diary of a Scientist, the podcast where we discuss neuroscience. How does our brain work and how does it connect with the rest of our body? And how does it shape our perceptions, influence our behavior, and impact our overall health? We also uncover science-based tools to enhance everyday life. I am Dr. Shambhu Yadav, a neuroscientist and a stress biologist at Harvard. In this episode, we are going to take a deep dive into advanced neuroscience-backed study techniques that go beyond generic advice. This solo podcast will be grounded in the cutting-edge cognitive neuroscience and neurophysiology as well as stress biology, focusing on how to truly optimize learning at neurological level. So, our aim here is to provide scientifically rigorous neuroscience-backed strategy to maximize memory, attention, and cognitive efficiency for high-performance learner. The brain is not a static organ. It changes, it adapts, it rewires itself every single day. And this ability to reshape neuronal connection is called neuroplasticity. Let's say if you ever learn a new skill, master a difficult concept, or even change a habit, you have experienced neuroplasticity in action. But what exactly happens in brain when you learn? And more importantly, how can we manipulate this process to make learning faster, deeper, and more durable? It all starts with tiny neuron, tiny electrical messenger that communicate across synapses. So synapses are the tiny gap between the nerve cells. Those are neurons that allow them to talk to each other. They are essential for everything our brain does, including thinking, learning, remembering, and controlling our body. When we learn something new, certain neuronal pathway activate. If you repeat the information, the connection between these neurons becomes stronger. Donald Hebb, a neuroscientist, proposed a fundamental principle of neuroplasticity, that is, neurons that fire together, wire together. This means that when neurons communicate repeatedly, they create a stronger bond. The more often you engage in the learning activity and strong these neuronal connections become. Now take a moment to understand this. Imagine you are hiking through a dense forest. The first time you walk through, there is no clear path, right? You struggle to push through the branches, stepping over rock and fallen trees. But if you keep walking that same route every day, the path clear. And over time it becomes smooth, it becomes familiar, and it becomes easy to navigate. That's exactly how learning works in the brain. The more you practice, the stronger the pathway becomes. At the core of this process is something called long-term potentiation, or LTP. The long-term potentiation, that is a LTP, is how the brain makes a stronger connection between neurons. When a neuron is repeatedly stimulated, its synapses become more efficient at transmitting signal. As I mentioned before, a synapse is the junction between two neurons that allow them to communicate. And this is critical for forming long-term memory. Scientists have investigated and they saw the pattern that LTP, that is long-term potentiation, depends on calcium signaling within synapses. So the calcium signaling is like a messaging system inside your cells. Calcium ion, which is the tiny charged particle, act as a messengers, helping cells talk to each other and control important functions like muscles movement, brain activity, and even heartbeats. So when neurons fire together, calcium enters the synapse, triggering biological changes that strengthen the connection. And over time, these stronger connections make it easier to recall information and perform learned tasks effortlessly. But LTP isn't just about the repetition. The brain thrives on challenge. A study shows that engaging with the material in an effortful way, such as solving complex problems, teaching others, or actively recalling information, produces a stronger long-term potentiation effect than passive learner. If you are ever noticed that the summarizing an idea in your own word help us remember it better, and that means we are tapping into this principle. So the more effort means the deeper the learning. So guys, now we know how brain function and remember the things. So now let's talk about the component in the neurons that involve in learning process. Let's start with neurotransmitters. These are the brain chemical messenger, and they play a huge role in how well and how quickly we learn. So let's start with the dopamine. So the dopamine, often called the motivational molecule, play a huge role in reinforcement learning. When we succeed at the task, dopamine flood your brain reward system, reinforcing the behaviors. And that's why gamifying a study session using rewards, using point, and using milestone can significantly improve learning efficiency. A study conducted in 2021 found that the dopamine released during learning enhances memory consolidation, which is by modulating synaptic plasticity in the hippocampus, the brain memory and learning hub. Another game changer is in our brain called acetylcholine. It sharpens focus, enhances signal strength between neurons, and improves the precision of learning. High level of acetylcholine during deep work states helps encode new information efficiently. Researchers at MIT discovered acetylcholine release is highest when we are engaged in goal-oriented tasks, which means that eliminating distraction during a study session. That can optimize learning by ensuring that acetylcholine, which is fully engaged in strengthening the right connection. And then there is a glutamate and the GABA. These are two neurotransmitters that work in delicate balance. Glutamate excites neurons, making them fire and form new connections. But too much glutamate can lead to overstimulation, causing mental fatigue and even neuronal damage. And that's where the GABA comes in. GABA means the gamma aminobutyric acid, which is a brain chemical that helps calm things down. It acts as a braking system, calming down neuronal activity to allow for proper consolidation of new information. A recent study in the Journal of Neuroscience showed that an optimal glutamate, which is the GABA balance, is crucial for efficient learning. Meditation, deep breathing, and the structured downtime can help regulate this balance and keeping the brain in the optimal learning state. So, how can we harness this knowledge to study smarter? First, create an environment that stimulates dopamine. Set clear, achievable learning goals. Reward yourself for the progress no matter how small that is. And the second, eliminate distraction to maximize acetylcholine activity. Turn off your phone notification, use noise cancelling headphone, and study in such an environment that promote deep focus. Break down the long study session into a small study session. And the third, regulate glutamate and GABA by balancing intense study session in breaks. Engage the activity that promote relaxation like meditation, walking, or even listening to the calming music. All these will help keep your brain chemical balance optimized. So by understanding how neuroplasticity works, we can take a control of our learning process. We are not stuck in the brain we were born with. Every study sessions, every challenge, and every effort we put into the learning rewire our brain. And with the right strategy, we can make that wiring stronger, faster, and more efficient. So next time you sit down to learn, remember, you are not just absorbing information, you are physically reshaping your brain, creating a better, a smarter version of yourself. Think about the last time you learned something new. Maybe it was a new language, or a complex scientific concept, or even a skill like playing the piano. At first, it felt difficult, right? But over time, it got easier. And that's because your brain was reorganizing itself, reinforcing connections, optimizing its structure, and strengthening its ability to retain information. But here is the real questions. How does this happen? Neuroscientists have spent decades trying to crack the code of memory formation, and what they found is something fascinating. Time is the key factor in making memory last. The way you space out learning session, the timing of retrieval, even the gaps between study session. All of this influence how deeply information gets embedded in your brain. Every time you learn something new, your brain undergoes a series of rapid changes at cellular level and tiny molecular level. It starts with neuron firing, which happen together, strengthening their connections and tagging important information for future recall. But this doesn't happen instantly. Your brain has a built-in a delay system to processing information. It doesn't store everything immediately. Instead, it assigns a time-dependent tag to relevant information and memory. Think of it like setting a bookmark in your brain. At first, new information creates weak connection, but if these connections are not enforced, that fade away, removed automatically from your brain. The reinforcement comes from repeated exposure and retrieval, and timing is everything. A landmark study published in Nature Neuroscience found that the brain tags memory during learning, but the actual consolidation of these memory happens later, when new learning events occur within a specific time window. And this explains why cramming fails. When you flood your brain with too much information at once, it doesn't have time to make stronger the most important connection. The more than a century ago, Herman discovered something called the forgetting curve. He found that people forget 50% of what they learn within an hour, unless they reinforce that knowledge. But the modern neuroscience has taken this research even further. We now know that the spacing out a study session significantly slows down forgetting. Instead of cramming, spacing forces that brain to re-engage with the material over time. Each review strengthens neuronal pathway, making recall easier and more automatic. Cognitive psychologist Robert Bork introduced the idea of desirable difficulty. The idea that a struggle to recall information actually makes learning stronger. So, what the optimal spacing interval? A study in the psychological science found that the best retention happens when review sessions are spaced at 10 to 20% of the desired retention period. For example, if you want to remember something for a week, review it after a day. If you want to remember it for a year, review it after a month. Most students make a major mistake when studying. They focus on one subject at a time. It feels logical, but guess what? It's actually one of the least efficient ways to remember and learn. The brain is not designed to process information in isolated blocks. It thrives when different skills or subjects are learned together. This is called interleaving. A study in the PNAS journal found that a student who mixed different types of math problems in single study session performed 43% better on tests than those who study each type separately. But why? Because interleaving forces the brain to recognize patterns, make deeper connections, and apply knowledge flexibly instead of just memorizing it. Now that we understand why time matters, let's talk about how to apply this. So here is what the latest research suggests. First, use spaced repetition. Instead of studying a topic intensely for hours in one day, review it briefly over several days. This step into your brain natural memory consolidation process. And the second, embrace active recall. Don't just reread notes. Test yourself. Try explaining. Test yourself. Try explaining concepts without looking at them. Your brain needs the challenge to form the durable memory. Third, introduce interleaving. Mix subject or problem types in the single session. Your brain adapts, leading to a stronger, more flexible knowledge. Fourth, prioritize sleep. Learning is not just about the input, it's about processing. A 2019 study in Science Journal, which is a very repetitive journal, showed that during sleep, the brain replays the learning material, strengthening the most important connection. If you don't sleep well, you are losing half of your learning power. The way you structure your learning directly impacts how well you retain information. So by spacing out a study session using active recall and interleaving subject, you can hack your brain's natural memory system to a light level learning. This isn't about the working harder, it's about the working smarter, in sync with how your brain actually functions. So next time you study, don't just think about what you are learning. Think about when and how you are reviewing that. Because in the game of memory, time is your most powerful tools. So let's talk about one of the most powerful way to study, active recall. This isn't just a productivity hack, it's a neuroscience backed way to change the way your brain encode and retrieve information. It all starts with predictive processing. Your brain is predicting machine. Every second it taking in a sensory information, comparing it to past experience and making guesses about what comes next. And this happens whether you are learning a new language, solving a math problem, or trying to remember what you ate for lunch yesterday. The predictive coding model explains how your brain refines its understanding of the world by constantly testing its own predictions. When you recall information, you are forcing your brain to make a guess. If it gets it wrong, you correct it, and if get it right, that connection becomes stronger. So why does recall create a stronger synaptic blueprint than the passive review? The answer lies in how memory forms at the neuronal level. When you first learn something, your neurons fire together, encoding that memory. But that essential coding is weak. Without reinforce, the connection fades. Reading over your notes feels productive, but it's misleading. It's like watching someone else lift weight and the thinking you are getting stronger. You will not get stronger, right? So the real learning happens when your brain struggles to retrieve information, and this struggle tells your neuron, hey, this is important. Strengthen this connection. And this is where long-term potentiation or LTP comes in. So the LTP is the process by which repeated activation of neuron strengthens the connections between them. The more you recall something, the more durable the neuron pathway becomes. And this happens because each time a neuron fires, it releases the neurotransmitters like glutamate, which reinforce the synapse. But the LTP doesn't just happen in the hippocampus, the brain main memory center. It also involves the prefrontal cortex, which helps organize and retrieve memory. This means when you actively recall information, you are not just reinforcing memory trace, you are also improving the brain ability to pull up those memory when it needed. Scientists have tested this hypothesis. In one study, students who use active recall remember nearly 50% more material than those who simply reviewed notes. And another study using fMRI scan found that the people engaging in recall showed greater activation in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus compared to passive readers. And these brain regions lift off as they retrieve information, showing just how deeply recall engages the memory network. So now question is, how do we optimize active recall? The key is retrieval induced potentiation. This is the process where each time you successfully recall something, you make it easier to recall next time. Think of it like a trail in the forest. The more you walk the path, the clearer and the easier it becomes to follow. But here is something surprising for you. If recall is too easy, it doesn't work as well. The sad reality is you need difficulty. You need to feel a bit of friction. Neuroscientists call this desirable difficulty. And that's why cognitive disfluency, that is making something slightly harder to process, actually helps to learn. So one of the best way to apply this is to increase the spacing between your recall attempts. Instead of testing yourself immediately after learning something, wait a few hours or even a day. This forces your brain to work harder to retrieve the information, strengthening the memory. This is beautiful, right? This effect called the spacing effect, and that has been proven in the numerous studies. In fact, the research from the UCLA found that the student who spaced out their retrieval practice performed 30% better on final tests than those who are cramped. Another method is interleaving, which is the mixing of different topics during recall instead of sticking with one subject at a time. And this forces the brain to continuously switch gears, which enhance adaptability and problem solving skill. The study published in the journal called Psychological Science, and they found that the student who interleaved different types of math problem performed significantly better on tests than those who in block. So now let's talk about how you can apply this insight to your own study routine. So the simplest way to implement active recall is by using flashcard, but not just any flashcard. You want to make sure they follow a spaced repetition system. There are various phone apps which use algorithm to test at increased interval, maximizing retention. But you don't need an app to make this work. One method is the brain dump technique. Close your notes, take a blank sheet of paper and write down everything you remember about a topic. Then check what you got wrong and repeat the process later. Another approach is the closed notebook questions method. Instead of passively reading, ask yourself questions and force your brain to retrieve answers before checking the material. This is especially powerful because it mimics the way the brain retrieves information in real world scenario. And the one final trick, say things out loud. A study from the University of Waterloo found that the speaking word instead of silently reading them enhance memory. The researcher called this the production effect, and it's worked because speaking engages more brain area, reinforcing learning into multiple sensory channels. If you take nothing else away from this, remember this: passive review is a trap. If you want to make knowledge stick, you have to struggle a little. You have to force your brain to recall. The more you do, the stronger your memory will become. It's not a magic, it's a neuroscience. So next time you sit down to study, don't just read your notes. Test yourself. Make your brain work for answer. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort is where the real learning happens. Now we will talk about sleep, which is another factor which involves to learn better. Sleep plays a crucial role in learning and memory consolidation, and it's way more active than most people realize that. It's not just about rest. Sleep is when your brain organizes, strengthens, and reshapes memory. If you are aiming to learn smarter, it's essential to understand the complex relationship between sleep and learning. So, let's start with slow wave sleep, which happens early in the night. During this phase, the brain consolidates the declarative memory, things like facts, definitions, and concepts. The hippocampus, the brain temporary memory center, replay information to neocortex. Neocortex, which is responsible for higher order cognitive function, including sensory perception, motor control, decision making, language, and consciousness. Neocortex, which is like a transferring information files from your computer's USB drive to the hard drive. Without deep sleep, this transfer does not happen properly, and it feels like the information never truly sink in. Then we have a REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So the REM sleep is a unique phase of sleep characterized by rapid eye movement, vivid dream, muscles atonia, which is the paralysis, and the heightened brain activity. It plays a crucial role in the memory consolidation, emotional processing, and brain plasticity. So the REM sleep, which kick in the later in night, this phase is all about the creativity, abstract thinking, and problem solving. So REM sleep strengthens the connection between the seemingly unrelated idea, which is why you may sometimes wake up with a solution to a problem that seems impossible to crack the night before. Research even shows that the people who nap with the REM sleep perform better at solving complex problems, which requiring lateral thinking. REM sleep isn't just for the rest, it's where your brain reconfigures itself for creative tasks. And the another fascinating aspect of sleep is synaptic homeostasis, which is the another hypothesis which process that while you are awake, synapses, which is a tiny connection between the neurons, strength in response to daily stimuli. But if these connections weren't pruned, the brain would become overloaded. So during deep sleep, the brain trims back weak or redundant synapses, make it room for new learning the next day. And this process keeps your brain efficient and prevent the overload, kind of like a cleaning out your closet to make room for the new things. So another thing is, which is also very important, sleep spindles, that is play a important role in the learning. These bursts of the brain activity during the non-REM sleep, which are critical for memory and motor skill consolidation. The more sleep spindle you have, the better you perform on memory tasks, especially when it comes to the procedural learning. So for anyone mastering a skill like playing the musical instrument or learning a surgical procedure, sleep spindles are your partner. And the good news is you can induce more sleep spindles naturally. A consistent sleep schedule, which is the key. Going to bed and waking up at the same time each day optimize your sleep cycle. And the natural light exposure in the morning helps regulate your circadian rhythm. And a warm shower before bed helps your body temperature drop, triggering the onset of deep sleep. Sound therapy. Next is the sound therapy, which is the pink noise. Pink noise is a type of sound that has a balanced mix of low and high frequency, creating a smooth, natural sound. It's often described as a deeper, softer version of white noise. And this can also boost sleep spindles, helping you retain more of what you learned the day before. So, how does all this translate to your study routine? First, don't skimp on the sleep in the name of extra study hour. It backfires. Instead, time your study session to align with your natural sleep cycle. Review factual material earlier in the evening when your brain is primed for the declarative memory storage. For creative tasks or the problem solving, save them for the closer to bedtime so that the REM sleep can do its work overnight. So, sleep isn't a lost time, it's actively involved in learning. When you leverage slow wave sleep and the REM sleep strategically, your brain works for you even while you rest. So if you want to get an edge in the learning, don't just study harder, sleep smarter. Now let's try to understand the dopamine modulation and the neurochemical control for the study, which is also a very fascinating topic. You know, dopamine is the brain ultimate motivator, that you know. It's the chemical that fuel our drive to learn, drive to explore, and drive to push through challenges. Have you ever felt excited to start something new but when lost interest halfway through? And that's dopamine at play. When dopamine is at just the right balance, you feel focused and you feel energized. But when it's too low, everything feels dull and feel exhausting. If you have too high, you feel restlessness and distracted, and the too low can lead to inattention like ADHD. And the getting dopamine right is the key to make studying not just effective but enjoyable. So dopamine flow through a specific pathway in the brain that is called the mesolimbic pathway, which is the reward circuit. It is the region we feel good after accomplish something. Then there is a mesocortical pathway which link dopamine to higher level thinking and decision making. When dopamine levels are well regulated in this circuit, you get the perfect balance of motivation and even mental clarity. So scientists call this the Goldilocks zone of dopamine, just the right amount for peak focus. You know, recent research shows that the student with the optimized dopamine signaling retain information more efficiently. A study conducted in 2023 and published in Nature Neuroscience found that the individual with moderate dopamine fluctuation performed better on long-term memory tasks compared to those with extreme high or low. That means a steady, well-balanced dopamine release is the key to effective study, not the random burst of motivation. So how do you naturally regulate dopamine for better learning? The simple way is exposure to bright light, preferably natural sunlight. You know, a study from the University of Arizona found that 30 minutes of morning sunlight boosts dopamine by stimulating retinal cell, that is the eye cell, that connect to the brain reward system. And that's why a study in the natural light makes you feel more awake and engaged. And the next, which is another important powerful dopamine booster, is exercise. When you move your body, you trigger the surge of dopamine, and that helps with the learning and memory. A recent study showed that the aerobic exercise, which increased dopamine receptor availability in the brain, making a student more responsive to learning. Even a brisk 10-minute walk that can make a huge difference in how well you absorb information. And the cold exposure might sound uncomfortable for you, but they have a surprising impact on the dopamine release or balance or maintain the steady dopamine level. Researchers at the Karolinska Institute found that the cold water exposure increased dopamine level by 250%. That's a massive jump, right? So the cold exposure triggers a survival response, activating your brain alertness system and making you feel more focused. But please don't do it too cold for longer time. You may face heart problem. So if you have ever felt a wave of mental clarity after putting cold water on your face, that's dopamine kicked in. And the next, which is also important player, is diet. Diet also play a huge role. This is my favorite one. Food rich in the tyrosine like eggs, fish, nuts, which help build dopamine naturally. A study conducted in Harvard Medical School found that a student who followed a high tyrosine diet had improved memory recall and faster problem solving abilities. Omega-3 fatty acid found in fish like salmons, which also support dopamine function by keeping neuron flexible and responsive. And the next, the nobility, which is another unexpected but effective way to keep dopamine level steady state. The brain thrives on varieties, right? And that's why you might find it easier to stay focused when you switch off your study location or learning method. A study from MIT found that the student who alternated between different environments while studying had better memory retention compared to those who study in the same spot every day. So the adding a little unpredictability like changing your study playlist or reviewing material in a different order keeps dopamine engaged and prevent boredom from setting in. And then there is the role of supplement like caffeine, which is a well-known cognitive enhancer, but its effect on the dopamine are often misunderstood. It doesn't directly increase dopamine production, but it blocks the receptor that make you feel tired. And this leads to the relative increase in the dopamine activity, making you feel more alert and engaged. But my friend, be careful. A 2023 study from Johns Hopkins University found that too much caffeine overstimulates the dopamine system, leading to anxiety and decreased focus. So the key is moderation. 1 or 2 cups of the coffee can boost concentration, but beyond that you risk diminishing returns. And the L-theanine, which is found in the green tea, which is an interesting supplement because it smooths out caffeine's effect. A study from Oxford University found that when caffeine and L-theanine were combined, a student experienced increased focus without the jitter or crash that caffeine alone can cause. This combination works because the L-theanine promotes alpha brain waves, which are linked to calm, focused state of mind. So how do you put all this into your practice routine? Build a dopamine optimized study routine. Start your day with at least 20 minutes of sunlight exposure to set your brain dopamine rhythm. And before diving into deep work, do some light movement, jumping jack, stretching, or even short walk. When studying, keep your session structured to include variety. Use different locations, mix subjects, and introduce element of surprise. If you rely on the caffeine, pair with green tea to avoid energy crash. And if you hit a mental slump, try a cold shower or a quick burst of exercise to reset your focus. It's not just about increasing dopamine, it's about keeping it stable. The best learners don't chase motivation, they create environment that support sustained dopamine regulation. Now let's talk about the achieving deep work mode attention. This is the foundation of deep work. Without it, learning is slow, memory is weak, and focus drift. But attention is not just one process. It's controlled by distinct neuronal network, each playing a unique role. So the first network is default mode network, that is called DMN. You might recognize it as the daydreaming state, where your mind wanders between unrelated thoughts. It active when you are not engaging in the task. And paradoxically, this seemingly unfocused state is crucial for creativity and problem solving. A study using fMRI scan showed that the DMN light up when people engage in self-reflection, recall memory, or make connection between abstract idea. But if left unchecked, it leads to distraction. And the second network is the dorsal and ventral attention system. The dorsal network direct voluntarily focus. Like when you read a book or solve a problem, it relies on the prefrontal cortex, the brain command center for goal-oriented behavior. And the ventral system, however, is reactive. It pulls attention towards unexpected stimuli like a loud noise or a phone notification. And the both networks are essential. The dorsal system keeps you locked into the task, while the ventral system ensures you stay aware of your surrounding. But in today's hyper-stimulating world, the ventral network often dominates, pulling focus away from deep work. Neuroscientists have found that the excessive ventral activation leads to attentional fragmentation, making sustained focus almost impossible. And the third system is locus coeruleus norepinephrine. It is the system called LCNE. This is the brain internal alarm, controlling arousal and alertness. It releases norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter that regulates attention instantly. The low level make you sluggish, while high level create stress and anxiety. So the key is balance. Research from the University of California suggests that the peak cognitive performance happens at moderate LCNE activation. Too little and the mind drifts. Too much and focus become chaotic. So the shifting from the solo work to deep work require conscious control over the network. And the first step is manipulating brain waves. Neuroscientists categorize brain activity into different frequency bands: delta bands, theta bands, alpha bands, beta bands, and gamma band. So the theta wave at 4 to 8 Hz, which are linked to deep learning and creative insight. They dominate during relaxed, immersive work. Alpha waves at 8 to 14 Hz, which promote calm focus. Beta waves from the 14 to 30 Hz fuel active concentration but can lead to stress if sustained too long. And the goal is to enter an alpha theta state where focus is deep but mind remains flexible. Techniques like the mindfulness meditation and rhythmic breathing which help induce this state. So a study shows that even the 5 minutes of slow breathing can shift brain activity from high theta stress to relaxed alpha. Ultradian rhythm offer another way to structure deep work. This cycle lasting 90 to 120 minutes. Although the best is like 55, but many people suggest the 90 to 120 minutes. And that govern the brain natural ebbs and flow of the focus. So cognitive performance peak in the first 30 minutes of the work session, then decline as mental fatigue set in. So neuroscientists at Stanford recommend working in 90-minute sprint followed by 20-minute break. They align with these rhythms. Ignoring these cycles lead to diminishing return, pushing past the natural focus window, resulting in lower productivity and increased stress. Distractions are the biggest enemy of the deep work. The modern world hijacks attention through dopamine manipulation, social media, phone notification, and endless scrolling flood the brain with the dopamine spike, reinforcing compulsive checking behavior. And this creates a loop of instant gratification, making sustained focus feel effortful. So, neuroscientists have compared this effect to addiction. Dopamine surge from the digital stimuli mimic those seen in substance dependence. Can you imagine? So, the solution? Rewire dopamine reward circuits. One approach is dopamine fasting, deliberately reducing exposure to fast rewarding stimuli like social media and excessive multitasking. Research from the Harvard suggests that short detox period can reset the brain baseline dopamine levels, making it easier to focus. Another strategy is neurofeedback training. This involves the real-time monitor of the brain activity, teaching individuals to regulate their attention state. A study on the EEG neurofeedback has shown that participants can learn to sustain alpha-theta dominance, improving concentration and reducing mental fatigue. Next is the brainwave entertainment. Using rhythmic sound pattern to sync neuronal activity has also shown the promised result. Bineuronal beats in the theta and alpha range have been linked to enhanced focus and cognitive flexibility. So, the crafting an optimal deep work schedule require aligning neuroscience with the daily habits. Start by designing a distraction-free environment, visual cluster, background noise, and digital interruption. All triggers ventral attention shift, breaking focus, and that break the focus. Neuroscientists recommend environmental cue to reinforce focus. A designated workspace, specific lighting, even the scent-based trigger can prime the brain for deep work. Time of the day also matters. Cognitive function follows a circadian rhythm, peaking in the morning and early afternoon. A study has shown that the analytical thinking is strongest during these hours. A study has shown that the analytical thinking is strongest during those hours, while creative insight emerge in the evening. So, scheduling deep work during the peak cognitive window optimizes your performance. So, the managing cognitive energy is just as important as managing time. The brain consumes massive amount of glucose during intense focus. So, prolonged deep work without energy replenishment leads to mental exhaustion. So, the nutrition which is also play a huge role, omega-3 fatty acid which is found in the fish and flaxseed. Omega-3 fatty acid found in fish and flax seeds support synaptic function. And then the flavonoid from the dark chocolate and the blueberries, which is also important to enhance blood flow to the brain. Then caffeine, when used to strategically boost alertness by the blocking adenosine, which is the neurotransmitter that promotes drowsiness. But the excessive caffeine can lead to overstimulation, impairing focus rather than enhancing that. And the movement is another tool for the sustaining deep work, like physical activity also increase brain derived neurotrophic factor, that is the BDNF, which is a protein essential for learning and memory. So the short term of exercise before deep work session enhance cognitive flexibility. Walking in particular has been shown to boost divergent thinking, a key component of problem solving. So the deep work is not just about the eliminating distraction, it's also about designing a system that supports sustained attention. By understanding how the brain allocates focus, leveraging natural rhythm and optimizing neurochemistry, it's possible to unlock peak cognitive performance. And the neuroscience offer a roadmap, but consistency is the key. The brain adapts to whatever it does repeatedly. Train it for the deep focus and sustained attention become effortless. And the role of stress and cortisol in the learning. So now let's talk about the role of stress and cortisol in learning. So harnessing eustress, which is the positive stress, isn't just an emotion, it's a biochemical event, a cascade of reaction in your body and brain. The way you respond to stress determines whether it sharpens your mind or erodes your ability to learn. The York-Dawkins law, which is illustrates this perfectly with its inverted U shape. On the left side, stress is too low, you are sluggish, unmotivated, and your brain isn't engaged. In the middle, stress is just right. It keeps you focused, alert, and your performance peaks. But move to far right, the stress overload, that is become like chronic oxidative stress. But move to the far right and stress overload the system. Your mind feels foggy, your memory weakens, and learning becomes a struggle. And this is the tipping point where stress transforms from being a useful force to an obstacle. And this happens because of neurobiology. When you are under stress, your brain releases cortisol. A little cortisol, perfect, is sharp attention, boosts motivation, and consolidate memory. But too much cortisol floods the hippocampus, the part of the brain that is responsible for memory formation and interface with the synaptic plasticity. So the chronic stress, which is the kinds that persist for the day or week or even year, actually shrink the hippocampus. This isn't just a theory. A study published in Nature Neuroscience shows that the prolonged cortisol exposure lead to measurable reductions in hippocampus volume, especially in the student facing chronic academic pressure. And another study in the Journal of Neuroscience revealed that the stress-induced hippocampal shrink directly impaired the spatial memory, which is crucial for learning new information. So the cortisol doesn't just affect the memory, it also messes with BDNF, the brain derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that plays a key role in the neuroplasticity. So BDNF is like a fertilizer for the brain, helping neurons grow, strengthening connection, and protecting against the neurodegeneration. And under chronic stress, BDNF level drop and your brain loses its ability to adapt and rewire itself efficiently. A study from the translational psychiatry found that the people with the high stress and low BDNF level showed significantly cognitive impairment compared to with balanced stress responses. Essentially, chronic stress does not just make learning harder, it biologically alters the brain, making it less adaptable over time. So, what is the solution? Let's talk about the solution. So, the key lies in shifting stress from distress, negative stress, to eustress, that is a positive stress. So, eustress is a kind of stress that motivate you, like before an important exam or presentation or even interview. It keeps you engaged without tripping you into burnout. So the trick is controlling the physiological response to stress so it works in your favor. One of the most effective ways to achieve this is through controlling breath work, especially heart rate variability, HRV, especially heart rate variability training, that is called HRV training. HRV measures how well your nervous system balances stress and relaxation. When HRV is high, your brain can shift smoothly between focus and recovery. When it's low, you are stuck in a stress out state. A study from Frontier in Human Neuroscience shows that practicing slow, deep breathing, particularly a 4 to 6 breaths per minute pattern, activate the vagus nerve, lowering cortisol and increasing HRV. In one study, students who practice HRV biofeedback for 5 minutes before studying showed significantly better memory retention than those who didn't. And the next is the cold exposure, which is another powerful tool for stress adaptation. When you immerse yourself in cold water, cortisol spikes, but when it drops rapidly, and over time this trains the body to handle stress more efficiently. Research from Cell Report Medicine found that the regular cold exposure increases norepinephrine levels, which improve focus and reduce the impact of chronic stress on brain. And a study, the Journal of Physiology, showed that the cold exposure boosts dopamine level by up to 250%, which enhance motivation and learning capacity. And then exercise, that is also play a crucial role in the building stress resilience, like aerobic exercise, which has been shown to counteract the negative effect of cortisol. A study from the proceeding of the National Academy of Science found that just 20 minutes of the moderate intensity exercise increased BDNF level by 32%, helping to reverse some of the damage caused by chronic stress. So resistance training also has a benefit. It triggers a mild stress response that paradoxically teach the brains to recover more efficiently from mental stress. And that's why the people who exercise regularly are more stress resilient than who don't. Now, how can we apply this knowledge to create a stress resilient study system? So here is the strategy. Strategy number 1. Before a study, spend 5 minutes doing slow controlled breathing. This primes your nervous system to process information more effectively. Second, if you feel fatigued or overwhelmed, take a cold shower or put cold water on your face. This resets your stress response and boosts dopamine level. Third, exercise daily. Whether it's a brisk walk, a short run, or few sets of resistance training, exercise maintain high BDNF level. Fourth, recovery is the key. Don't let stress build up for the long without recovery. Engage in the activity that actively lower the cortisol, like meditation, socializing, or simply spending time in nature. So stress isn't inherently bad for learning. Mismanaged stress is bad for learning. When managed correctly, stress can enhance focus, strengthen memory, and make the brain more adaptable. So the key is knowing how to keep stress in balance. And that's the difference between letting stress work for you or letting it work against you. So till now we have talked about memory, attention, neuroplasticity, dopamine, sleep, and stress. Now let's bring everything together into a powerful neuroscience backed study system that you can actually use. I want you to walk away from this with a clear, practical plan that make a study effortless and deeply effective. Science has given us so many insight into how the brain learns, and if we use them correctly, we can completely transform the way we approach studying. So let's start with the structure of your study day. You have probably heard the argument about whether it's better to study in the morning or at night. Both have advantage, but they serve different purpose. In the morning, your cortisol level are naturally high, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually help with the alertness, and this is the best time for deep focused learning. Your prefrontal cortex, that is responsible for logical thinking and problem solving, is most active in the first few hours after waking. A study showed that the memory consolidation happens best when you engage in a structured, effortful recall, which is early in the day. If you are trying to master complex concepts, the morning is your sweet spot. But there is something fascinating about the evening study too. At night, your brain is in the more relaxed state, and your prefrontal cortex isn't as dominant, which means your ability to make creative connection is stronger. And that's why nighttime is the ideal for reviewing material, making association, and working on conceptual understanding. Research from the University of Tokyo found that the student who reviewed material at night, which is the before sleep, retained 30% more information compared to those who study in morning. The reason? Sleep play a massive role in memory consolidation, and the information process right before bed has a higher chance of being transferred into short-term storage to long-term storage. So what is the perfect schedule? It depends on your goal. If you are tackling a difficult subject, do the heavy lifting in the morning. Use the evening for review and reflection. And don't underestimate the power of naps. A study from Harvard Medical School found that a 20 to 30 minute nap after studying boosts recall by nearly 20%. If you can fit in the short nap after a focused study session, you are essentially giving your brain extra time to consolidate learning. Now let's talk about how to make your study session truly effective. You have probably heard of the Pomodoro technique, which is the 25 minutes of work followed by 5-minute break. It's a great method, but for deep learning we can do better. Research suggests that the ideal work cycle aligns with ultradian rhythm, which lasts around 90 minutes. Your brain actually goes through the cycle of high attention and low attention through the day. If you push yourself pass this cycle, your efficiency drops. And that's why the base study session lasts about 90 minutes, followed by a 20-minute break. This is the rhythm where your brain is designed to follow and working with it rather than against that. And this leads to better retention and less mental fatigue. During those 90 minutes, you need a strategy that maximizes recall and deep understanding. And this is where active recall and interleaving comes in. Active recall is the simple but incredibly powerful. Instead of the passively rereading notes, you actively test yourself. Ask yourself questions. Write summary from the memory and force your brain to retrieve information. Every time